Today we're going to be looking at different ways in which we can improve our merged images. And the first thing we are going to look at specifically is adding shadows and adjusting the lighting as part of the work. So I have my two images up here. I have the one that I was editing last time, which has both myself in the image, but with the shadows missing underneath. And I have the original image where I can use this as almost a reference point for what needs to be darker on the table. So as I can see straight off the bat, I need to just add a darker part under the arm, kind of coming more towards this corner because of the way the lighting was in the room. But I have one big problem point, which is going to be this really white area here. So when you are editing images, anything that is really bright or really dark is going to be very difficult for you to overcome. But we're going to use a variety of different tools and we'll see what will work. The first thing I'm going to do again is I'm going to use the Polygonal Lasso tool, and I'm just going to draw out a shape under the arm roughly in the shape of the shadow here, and just make this portion of the area a little bit darker. I'm looking at my layer tools first of all, and I'm making sure I have my background selected, because if I select the copied layer and I try to make any changes, it's not going to affect the background. So I'm going to use the Polygonal Lasso tool. I'm going to draw a rough shape just under the arm because I don't want there to be a weird space between where the shadows are and where they stop. And looking at the image, I think there's kind of a curved shape around here, leading off to the edge of the screen. Bring it to the edge over here, and finally double click. There we go. Okay, I'm going to go to Adjustment, Brightness and Contrast, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to just reduce the brightness in this area, not even by very much. -8, maybe -5, that might be a bit too much, so let's have a look. Yeah, okay, so I have a very basic rudimentary shadow in here. It's still missing a lot of the natural aspects. If I look under my arm here, I can see there's a much darker area. Same for the back just behind my elbow, which is obviously missing here. And I still have this problematic white area. The next tool I'm going to look at using is the Magic Wand tool. So Magic Wand, I'm going to click on the white area. What Magic Wand will do is it will select everything of one color in an area. So for instance, if I were to click on the wall, it would select everything that is roughly the same color on the wall. Now, if you're finding that your Magic Wand isn't quite selecting enough, like for instance, I can see there's this kind of white area around the side it hasn't selected, what you can do is you can deselect and you can increase the tolerance. So let's try to put it up to about 50, click on it again. Okay, there we go, that's much better. Now we can see it's encompassed this whole really bright area. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go through, tell you what, let's try brightness again, brightness and contrast. I'm just going to mark the brightness down a small bit. Then I'm going to go to levels. And using the levels tool, I'm just going to make it slightly darker. I think due to this being such a problem part of the image, it's going to be very difficult to make this area look natural, and that's probably a fault of mine from when I was taking the image. However, we try and make the adjustments as best as we possibly can. And although I'm really not happy with the way that this is looking, for the moment it will have to do. And if I were to take this image again, I would just make sure I was checking the lighting on the table. Okay. The main tool we will be looking at now is the burn tool. I have it selected over here. This is in essence a brush. So if, for instance, I select the layer of myself and I just draw across my arm, what the tool does is it makes everything in the selected area darker. So you can see I've given myself a beautiful tan here. I'm just going to undo that. This is what we can use to add the shadows. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And the first job I'm going to do is I'm just going to click everything that's in the shadowy area underneath and just make it look a bit darker. It's quite a big brush, which is good in some ways because it's affecting not just to the edge of the shadow, but depending on where you're clicking on, you can get a little bit of the outside area as well. What I want to do now is I'm just going to use the shadow tool. I'm going to make the brush smaller, and I'm going to do these small parts under the elbow, which as we can see are much, much darker. So I need this to be quite small for this. This is going to be tricky, especially if you're using a touchpad. It will be easier if you have a mouse. You can zoom in on the area as well. Okay, let's get my burn tool again. And I'm making sure I'm using this as a reference, so I can see that everywhere kind of under my arm is much, much darker. Okay, oh, that might be a bit too big. There's also a small part of shadows where my hand is meeting on the table there. Okay, if you want to really experiment with this and see what you can do, make a note of where the darker parts of the shadows are. For instance, behind the elbow there's a much darker area, so I can always increase the hardness and the size of this, and I can start dragging some different darker parts which kind of match with where the shadows are there. If, unlike me, you do not have an image you can use for reference, what you will have to do is you will have to look at the image that you can see and try to see any of the aspects of lighting in the image and use those as reference to help you. Experiment with it, see what you can do, try and see if you can create a realistic shadow using what I've shown you here.